think Federer went to somewhere and said, even despite winning so many matches, if you look at my points, I'll lose 50% of my points. And that's the same when you have so many suppliers and so many different things. You're going to lose many, but the idea is to lose little when you do and win the bigger ones. And then at a holistic level, it'll make sense. You again need that mental resilience. The very first project that I did, and this is me as a programmer, I walked in and my boss said, "Oh, there's no computer for you for the next month." What am I doing as a programmer if I don't have a computer? But funnily enough, that forced me to go out and talk to stakeholders because that's all I could do at work. And that was such a great start. Like, it was such a coincidence and I hated it then, but it forced me to go, what are your customers or your users actually thinking? How do you actually talk to them? So it forced a lot of good habits about stakeholder management in me.
Welcome to Beyond Brilliance. I'm your host Jay Gopinathan, and today's guest has built a career that spans across continents, industries, and billion-dollar transformations. Baishakhi Connor is a senior P&L and operational leader whose journey began in a small town in West Bengal and has taken her through the worlds of technology, investment banking, FMCG, and retail at massive scale. She started as a programmer at TCS, pivoted into investment banking at ABN AMRO on major M&A deals, then moved on to operational leadership. At Saab Miller, she led the strategy that turned the Great Northern into Australia's first billion-dollar beer brand. At Anheuser-Busch, she delivered major EBIT synergies across APAC. At Coles, she led supplier management through automated DC rollouts. She managed COVID disruptions and turned around a struggling exclusive brands portfolio. Throughout her career, she's demonstrated extraordinary ability to drive transformation that lasts well beyond her scope. She brings structure to ambiguity, she connects strategy to execution, and develops people along the way. I can't wait for you guys to explore this episode with me. Let's welcome Baishakhi Connor. Hey Baishakhi, welcome to Beyond Brilliance podcast. Very kicked to have you here today. Let's start at the beginning of where this remarkable journey started. So you kicked off your career in IT consulting, working on global system rollouts across India, Australia, United States. I'm curious about those formative years. Where did this young Baishakhi find herself when she stepped out of her small town? And what are some of the biggest lessons you learned?
Thank you so much, Jay, first of all, for inviting me here. I've said it to you before. I have watched some of your episodes and they do so much justice to your title, Beyond Brilliance. So hopefully I'll be able to bring something to your listeners as well. But coming back to my story, as like you said, I grew up in a small town in India back in the 80s and 90s. So this is before the internet, so I did not know much about the world at all. My parents had grown up there, like both within 1 kilometer of where we were. We didn't travel much. We were just a very typical lower middle class family. When I was in year 6, a friend's sister got a job with a software company, which eventually was a company I joined. So that was Tata Consultancy. And this is, I think, in the mid-90s, and she joined this thing. And then a year or so later, that friend said, "Oh, my sister's going to US." And for us to think that someone is even going in a plane, let alone going to a different country, was so foreign that from class 6, I'm like, oh, what is this software thing? I must get into that because it seemed like a good ticket to come out of. So I didn't know anything else about programming, coding, computers, whatever. After that, literally from class 7 onwards, I started taking some computer science in school and different things. But that's where it started. And then eventually I got through into engineering with the rank that I got. I got through the top state university, but not computer science. So I did civil engineering, but then eventually did get that job in Tata Consultancy on the very first day of campus, and I got that. It was a good 2 years of other projects, etc. And then, yes, I also went on my very first plane ticket and went to US. But before that, the very first project that I did, and this is me as a programmer, I walked in and my boss said, "Oh, there's no computer for you for the next month." What am I doing as a programmer if I don't have a computer? But funnily enough, that forced me to go out and talk to stakeholders. So I kind of time shared with another guy, but he had the computer. So it's like whenever he didn't need it, I could do some little actual programming work. But otherwise, it forced me to go out and talk to people, right? Because that's all I could do at work. And that was such a great start. Like it was such a coincidence. And I hated it then, but it forced me to go, what are your customers or your users actually thinking? How do you actually talk to them? And coming from a small town in West Bengal, I was in Bangalore, the language was different, like, and I wasn't an outgoing person or anything. So it forced a lot of good habits about stakeholder management in me. And then years later, there was also some discipline. I think once I just said to someone through all those talking, and she said, oh, can you do this? I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And later my boss said, where's the process? Where did it come into our kind of like, how we have a process of where you log the request and then you do something, then we get paid because we are outsourced companies. And my boss said, well, you just have to do this on your own time. So I got the discipline. Way later, learned to balance both. So this was in Australia again years later. My Australian boss said, yes, there's this process, right? So people go through this process and they request. And this guy comes and asks me for something. And I told my boss he hasn't done the process. And my boss said, oh, just ignore it because they need to learn if they don't do the process, you ignore it. And I followed exactly that. And in other cases, I probably wouldn't know what happened. But as it happened, I ended up marrying this guy. So he is my husband now. He keeps reminding me that I ignored him in the very first instance of when we came across each other. I completely and utterly officially ignored him. So actually balance discipline and stakeholder management and all of it together, right? You can't be a robot. So absolutely in very large transformation programs, process is important. And coding teaches you, and I used to do COBOL programming in mainframes back then. So it is pure coding, right? No configuration, just coding. And it teaches you a lot of discipline. You have to do inline comments and you need to document where you, even these days, even if you're using Confluence or Jira or anything else, we are used to that discipline, that everything needs to be not just working, but usable by someone else after you so that it stays. And that was a big learning. The stakeholder management was a big learning. But given my husband keeps on reminding me, balancing them is really important. So we learn so much discipline, but it needs to be balanced with humans, which is also how execution works. So that was like, it was a really, really good learning. I worked there for 5 years and across, like you said, India, US, Australia, in that company, and so much learning about discipline, dealing with people in different countries and bringing them all together to get something delivered. It's a superb learning.
Yeah, what a fascinating start to this episode. So you've literally had no computer the first month as a programmer. I don't know how you pulled that one off. And it's interesting you found your husband there, right? That's another fascinating story. And I kind of resonate with the rigor of COBOL programming. It would have taught you like the importance of documentation, having the discipline to go and do inline comments. Yeah, I kind of resonate with a lot of you just talked about. So your next chapter, Baishakhi, takes you into a completely different world. You're going into investment banking at ABN AMRO, working on billion-dollar cross-border M&A deals, and that's quite a leap from being in IT consulting to finding yourself in a high-stakes environment like investment banking. And what did they teach you about strategy, risk, and storytelling, if you will? So, what were your biggest lessons from that particular environment?
First of all, yes, it was quite a big leap. Like during the end years of my technology career, I I had this sense of I wanted to solve the whole problem, but I had only this one tool of technology, which is why I did an MBA and again was lucky enough to get this banking job again on day zero of campus. But it is a big leap, and I'm only saying that because there was someone in one of my clients that told my husband or kind of questioned my husband, are you sure she's doing like actual investment banking or is she one of the call centers or consulting people in there? Because she said to my husband, how does an Indian programmer get into M&A and in banking? So it is like, it's funny how much stereotypes go through our heads. And I say this not to say she was evil in some way, but we all have stereotypes in our head. And just makes me more aware of what I have. But coming back to investment banking, definitely such a big risk environment. First of all, we were working on, I think some of my colleagues said we don't get off the bed unless it's at least $1 billion deal. And most deals were far bigger. Like when I just joined, I think there was the Tata Chorus deal, etc. They are like double-digit billions of dollars of deals. And eventually when I did Sab Miller deals, etc., they're also 12 billion, $16 billion deals. But the inputs that go into it, which is actually just intellectually, it is risk measurement. So there's a measurement called beta, which is literally saying versus the market, how much more or less risk is this company? And it is subjective. Yes, there's a lot of reports, etc., but it is subjective, right? And
Mhm.
that's the assumption. You can make like decimal point changes and the price might change by billions. And that was like, as a young investment banker, that was so fascinating that as analysts, we are making, yes, there's like lots of checks and balances to it, but we were making those calls every day and going like, what is the range of price for this huge multi-billion dollar company? Like, what is the price we should pay for it? And it was just so strange for me to see all that risk, but also the risk that we as bankers took every day, even in our own business. So it's a high risk, high reward career in itself. So there's massive bonuses, massive payments, but also massive hard work, massive hours. And then also we spent so much of our time on pitching. So
Mhm.
because they are so expensive deals, the whole business of M&A investment banking, so investment banking has many sides. I worked in mergers and acquisitions. It's about pitching to many companies that this is why you should divest this division and it'll create more value, or this is why you should acquire this other business or this other division and together you will make more value. But if you're telling them to spend 5, 10, 15, 20 billion dollars, of course, most of them will shy away from that risk. So, which means we were pitching for many, 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 many to get one, and that one will make or break our business. So, even that sense of just risk in the business itself was a big learning to see how much things have to be structured and sold and story told as well. You asked about storytelling, and it was storytelling. Like the pitches are very templated. Investment banking and mergers and acquisitions can be very templated, but also needs a very sharp narrative of why this would actually create value. There's also a lot of pick your own truth game in it because the truth complex and I'm not even saying spin. There's definitely spin of story in all kinds of businesses, no doubt about it. But I'm not talking of spin. I'm also saying if I throw at you every data in the business, you will just be overwhelmed. So therefore, I have to pick the truth that is relevant for this context and is relevant for me to influence you. And therefore, there's so much of this picking your truth game in it. In silly matters like, I need to say that my bank is number one and it's not. So then how do I go down into details to say, for deals originated in Hong Kong for whatever Australian mining clients in the cobalt sector, it's number one. And that
Mhm.
truth matters to your client. It is absolutely true, but it is still a picked truth. That was also fascinating for me. And a lot of that goes on in many different businesses, and it helps me in both ways. It helps me tell a story and pick my own truth. It also helps me being on the other side of the table sometimes and going, I can see that you have only picked this truth. What about these other assumptions? And tell me about that. So I can see it both ways, and it is very useful in leadership now.
Yeah, that's very fascinating to learn that, right? Pick your truth was an important skill to master probably in your role. And I'm very sure that this is probably employed a lot more in different settings. And you rightly pointed, sometimes it's the art of storytelling that actually gets through your point. And also you are finding yourself to connecting with different types of individuals. somebody that could be tech savvy, somebody that is business savvy, somebody that is finance savvy. When you're working in an organization, you will have to obviously work with different departments, and you tailor your responses based on what they want to hear and what's the truth that will resonate with them, so they can pick and run or help you in the process of
Yeah.
getting things done. So it's amazing to hear that. And that's such a critical skill that many people undervalue or don't index on. And I'm very
Yeah.
glad that you brought
Yeah.
that point
I
across.
think many people are also cynical about it. They think that all that means is that I'm spinning the truth or creating something to manipulate you. It can be, some people will use it to manipulate. Everything in the world can be abused, but mostly it is a useful skill because, like you said, if I'm talking to the tech person versus the finance people, there's no point banging on about the exact tech stack, etc., to the finance person. They
Mhm.
don't understand and they don't care. So understand deeply and explain to them what the return is on the investment they're about to make and why they should believe that that return is plausible. Not about the tech stack unless it is relevant to say, here's an example where this exact thing was used by, say, our competitor or something. Like, otherwise it's not relevant. Why go into it? Or if you miss the tech stack with the tech person, then it shows lack of preparation. And then you're going to run out of time to go exact finance. And they're more interested in, am I really doing it in a stable, sustainable way, secure way for technology to work, etc. So you kind of have to say what you need to say to that audience, to that person.
Perfect. Yeah. Communicating upwards, communicating downwards, communicating sideways, right? That totally makes sense. So, Baishakhi, then you moved on to consulting and you were advising C suite executives on cost transformation and growth, if I remember right. And how did that exposure help you in the transition? What kind of stories or lessons you learned playing that particular role?
Yeah. This is the time that I moved to Australia. So until now, I was kind of the transient worker in many different places of the world. And I had just got married and just moved to Australia with that stakeholder I had initially ignored. Now we are married, and it took me a full year to get my first job in Australia and some other countries in the world. There's a big focus on what local experience do you have. So, despite my global experience, it took me that long time to get my first job, and this was in consulting. And I very consciously made a switch again with that same ethos of I want to see the holistic business and transform the holistic business, moved from investment banking to consulting. This was actually the only time, I think, in my entire career where my performance was below average. And it was a shock to me. Like, I had been an academically brilliant person my entire life. I had worked hard and been rated very high, usually very high, sometimes average, but never, ever, ever in my life was I rated below average, except in this consulting job. But that taught me so much, not the rating, but actually the lessons behind why I got that. It taught me so much that in the next job, it led to massive, massive transformation and promotions and everything. Everything that you want from a career, I got because of the learnings here. And that learning was actually storytelling. So if investment banking was all about numbers, risk, templated pitches, etc., and also academically, I kind of came at it as answering the exam questions. So until now, whether it's academically, whether it's technology, there's always a defined thing. Like, this is the thing you need to deliver. This is the problem. This is not working. This is what you solve. Or this is the target, or this is the divestment. This is what you do. And I came at consulting trying to answer that exam question. And mathematically, that is right. But in consulting, the bigger game is to take your audience and your client through it in such a way that they come to the answer themselves, which is a totally different skill. So even though the question might be, why am I making such a loss? You're going to give an entire story of the context, the market, not just numbers and charts, but actual stories of what's happening, including some interviews you've done within the company, etc., to make them feel like by the time you come to the answer, that is the answer they've come up with themselves. So you're not just going to do one meeting. You're not going to give them an answer of, this is the company you should buy, or these are the list of 10 companies you can look at buying, pick one. it is so much more of context and storytelling and influencing, and you are always in the background. You are never this is not McKinsey strategy or Bain strategy or whatever it is, meta strategy. So you will see the CEO get up and say the strategy, and you need that CEO to feel like it was their own thinking, their own idea. And that was a completely and utterly different skill for me to learn. Even saying things with pictures and making things real to people, all of these were very different skills to me, coming from tech and numbers, etc. And that set me up for success in the next job.
Yeah, that's such a powerful story that you reflected on, right? How do you guide an audience or your stakeholder to arrive at a solution that you formed, but make it believe that they came up with that solution, right? That is such a powerful lesson by Shaki. Believe it or not, I think that's one area where I feel like people have to let go their egos and also, be very cognizant of the audience that they're talking to, be very cognizant of who they are trying to influence here. So it's amazing story. Thank you so much for, kind of emphasizing on how storytelling and how narrative setting goes a long way in influencing your stakeholder and getting them to sign the dotted line, right? That's what we're all after. We want the deal to be done and you want them to take the decision. So and then you had a big pivot now, right? You went from consulting, you find yourself in Saab Miller, and it's an FMCG space. What led you there, and what are lessons from there?
For my entire career, for over 2 decades, what keeps me driven is transformation and making things better than what they were, etc. And it's always been the case. So as I was made redundant from my investment banking job in the peak of the financial crisis, at the same time we got married, and at the same time my husband decided, I've had enough with a corporate career, I'm going to switch that. So here we both were just married, I'm in a new country, and neither of us had jobs, and he had always wanted to and started his own business. I was doing, setting up the accounting, setting up marketing and different things like that. I actually tell many people that's where I learned more finance than my finance roles and my investment banking roles and whatever. Because when you're doing it by yourself without anyone else, and also that is what, like, it's your own money, it's your own skin in the game, it makes such a big difference. So I learned so much about actual accounting than any of my MBA or anything else. And then we also did our own marketing. It started just basic, right? We would put an ad every Tuesday in the local newspaper. And immediately from Tuesday afternoon, we would see phone call spike. Wednesday was high, and then it would come down. Like, it's such a tangible learning of your return on your marketing and different things. And then I went into consulting. And through that year and a half or 2 years in consulting, I would pine for that. What is happening with all these pretty slides and pitches that I'm doing? Like, I completely and utterly believe in my recommendation. But what's the company doing with it? Because I'm moving on to the next client and the next pitch and next whatever, right? And that's what drew me to finding an industry role. So I was looking for industry roles. I wasn't sure though, because until here, I've done technology consulting, investment banking, and management consulting. All of them are service based, right? So we had clients, and I wasn't how I would feel. So I actually took a 6-month contract with a company called Foster's. I joined Foster's, and the very next day, Sab Miller did a hostile bid for this company. So given my M&A background, I spent a lot of time in actually defending that hostile bid. Sab Miller did eventually take it over. And then I got to work with Sab Miller and then AB InBev, which are, the second biggest and then the biggest beer company in the world. Learned enormously, but my transition or my driver of transition was, how do I do more transformation and keep in touch with what is happening with my recommendation? Is the company actually transforming? Like, with all my recommendation, I had such a drive to see it go through, whether good or bad. I wanted to see the results, and that's why I moved to industry at that time.
Interesting. So you'd gotten a taste of having your skin in the game
Yeah.
through your husband's company, and there you got, a taste of running your own business, and probably you had
Yeah.
the most learnings. Going to the next transformation, the Great Northern comes into picture, right? What became Australia's first $1 billion plus beer brand. Can you take us into that journey? What were some of the turning points that unlocked that amount of growth? And what was your personal reflections on what transpired there?
This was my first big turnaround. So I have such a personal connection to this one. And it was also something which brought together all of these things from different parts of my career that I could bring together, where it was with the discipline and process or the storytelling and people and all of it together. And it's, such a big turnaround of a company obviously is always a full of company and team job, and the executive leadership have a lot to play with it. But I was privileged to have a big role. So how it happened, once all these M&As and divestments were done, so I think I spent the first 1.5, 2 years of my role on all of that. We divested a fair few non-core businesses as well. And then I had this Queensland project. So I live in a southern state of Australia called Victoria. This is in a northeastern state called Queensland, 2 hours flight away. I would spend most of my week there and do a project there for commercial growth of that state. And as it happened, so that's the state which was the only state where my employer was number 2 company versus everywhere else we were number 1. That's why the project. Great Northern at the time was only found in that state. So it's a brand from that state. It's a regional brand and only there. But it was growing phenomenally in that state. Still quite small, but growing phenomenally, like at 80%, 90% a year from a small base. Then I come back to the center after that project. And we had been trying to turn around this full strength beer called Victoria Bitter, extremely popular in Australia at one time. It was 1 out of every 4 beers in Australia was that beer. By the time I joined, it was just slightly under, but about that. 1 out of every 4 or 5 beers was that beer. So massive, right? But declining at 10, 11% every year. So when I came back from Queensland, firstly, there's a very, very strict process that's at Miller Run for strategy, which is such a big learning that we always did a where to win strategy, situation analysis, a how to win strategy, like extremely structured. That structure itself throws up a lot of narrative and data points that helps us influence executives. But also having done this Queensland project, I went, if that's growing so much there, what's stopping us from taking that, getting it national and seeing that growth come up and offset this? And it was a 6-month debate, I kid you not. So thankfully I had my best manager from my entire career was the manager at this time. And we worked together on this, on how to influence and how to have conversations with many different people beforehand. And it was a 6-month debate where the primary thing was, as if the growth of this tiny brand will offset the decline of this massive brand. It's not mathematically possible. And then we had to wait and go, we are a brand business. We can make or break brands by ourselves, like we are the number 1 in the country. And what is needed is big, big bets. Like if you have a $10, $15 million property, or property in this business is like someone who sponsors the NRL. The NRL is your property. So in this case, we sponsored the Australian Footy League, the AFL, and we take that off Victoria Bitter and put it onto Great Northern. And that's again a huge risk program, right? So that's why the debate for 6 months to do it. But eventually we did, and we had to change the entire company. We had to change how we were structured. We had to change where we put our best marketers on the biggest beer, because they are the best. Their resume needs thing, or on the number 22 brand that we're saying we will back. What happens to your brewers who now have to do many, many runs in the year, in the day, instead of the one time they press for VB, because that's a big number of cartons coming out, right? So they can just set it up the machines once. Now you have to go, oh no, we do Great Northern, which is a smaller run. Then we change it over for this craft beer. Then we change it over for that other smaller beer, and then maybe a smaller run of VB. So they're having to work harder. The sales teams have to sell different things. I did about 300 small group sessions across the country in breweries, on sales roadshows, etc., to make that strategy real for people. And year later, my reward was someone who's from that company, and a peer of mine was explaining this to some other people. And he said one of his best experiences was being in that company when everyone and everything was decided based on, was it serving towards making Great Northern the number one brand? Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. And that was the goal. Like, as a strategy person, that is like complete and utter goal. That is what you want, that everyone focuses on this one priority and keeps going. So that's how we got the team mobilized. But as you can imagine, for such a project, there was massive teams of who's designing the brand, who's designing the actual beer.
Right? It's phenomenal. And what struck me there in that conversation was, how massive this undertaking is. Like, betting the number 22 brand to tip the company's fortunes in the way it did. I don't know what conviction you had and what data points did you actually muster to prove to your teams. Very interested in learning a little bit more about what role did data play here? Like, did you have to go and do a lot of experiments, smaller experiments in different regions to prove it out that this is going to be the winning strategy? Or it was just purely based on the intuition and the sheer ability to take risk? What was it based on?
At that level, intuition does give you a start, but it doesn't get you buy-in, because this is a multinational company about to bet many billions, really. So no, like I said, Sam Miller forces an extremely structured strategy process, which is superb. So we used to go through what is called a situation analysis first, which is completely and utterly data-based. There's a template-based thing that you must do so that so I worked in Australia, but then if someone at the center wants to look through all of the countries together, 180 different countries, but even the top 50 countries, they can compare. So there's a templated part, and then there's a non-templated country part. And we were able to show through our competitors, the bigger competitors, and also the craft beer. People were, now they're moving to non-alc, but at that stage, they were moving to lighter or mid-strength versions of the same beer. So what we were able to pitch through that data is that Great Northern in Queensland, in that original state, was full strength but lighter than the VBs, etc. It is in a clear bottle, etc. So all of the characteristics, we had to do sensory tests, etc. So we had the data for what type of beers are growing now, where, customer focus groups, everything else. So all of the data had to point to this would work. And then we had to structure it differently to say we would do a mid-strength beer, a mid-strength variant of that beer. We're using the brand, but a mid-strength variant of that beer. So we had to do an enormous amount of data work. And then that is what is used to influence the executives. Yes, it is still a bet, but the data had to show that directionally we're making the bet in the right direction. Now the only bet we were making is that quantum enough or not? Data is still my strong point. So that is my core. Personally, that is my core strength. So absolutely I start with data first, just that the way to then influence is often based on stories and anecdotes. But the data is the strong suit, especially like in a startup. So right now I'm helping my husband and son on a startup. And because it's so small, so the investment, and we did make like hundreds of thousands of dollar investment, but that's small. And we are kind of 3 people in the company. So it is much easier to make bets on intuition and actually the right thing, because the data analysis is too much effort, are actually more costly than just doing the bet. The other situation in later years when I worked in retail and we had 1,000 stores, it's very different to working in FMCG where you can take 2-3 years to design and build a new brand from scratch. You lock in prices with your customers twice a year, maybe once a year. Grocery retail is 24/7 and very different. So in those cases, how you gather data is it's still data based, but sometimes we might say actually much better to just put that product in 10 stores and see how it goes. Do people actually buy it? Rather than doing this big focus group and historical analysis or whatever. It's like, you have a new product, put it in, let's see. So that's a different kind of bet, but it is always data based, but depends on the size and nature of the company, how you get your data. And sometimes the data can be intuition based, but not in such massive, massive companies.
Yeah,
You get a start. Someone's been there for 20, 30, 40 years, their intuition is actually data. They just can't articulate it yet. So it gives you a start, but then you can go get the data to prove it.
got it. And it always starts with a hypothesis, right? And you back it with data and validate your hypothesis with data. And that's that's a powerful recipe to having a strategy backed by data is always something that you can easily convince your stakeholders. Plus, also you have your bases covered before making that big decision of running with it, right? So yeah, that's very insightful. So you talked about a manager, right? I saw a spark in your eye when you said I had the best manager during that particular time period, right? What was so unique about him that you liked him so much?
And I still keep up with him. He's absolutely my best ever manager. A lot of things. So in terms of work, I came in, like I said, from a tech numbers problem solving. So very analytical mind. He came in from a sales and marketing mind. And he taught me a lot about how to make my strategy real, even from the start. So even when we were doing this templated process of rigorous structured data work, he would say, sure, you have the data of, say, consumer sentiment, right? And you can see a chart. We have the Australian Bureau of Statistics and we see very detailed charts. And he said, how about some newspaper quotes? How about some interviews of people outside stores and what they think? And it makes things real. So apart from this chart that people, yes, the execs, of course, are intellectually capable of understanding that, but to make them feel, and especially when I went out to brewers, sales managers, etc., that made it so real to people. It's like, yes, I feel like that. Now I know what you need to do. So he did that in terms of work and a lot more. Like he really pushed me into the limelight quite a lot. And while we were doing this massive project, and he guided me so much in how to articulate and how to tell the story and whatever. At every single stage, he would say, that is her work. And even other executives, sometimes I would be, I don't know whether it's a typical Indian or whatever, like some of us analysts are like, oh, yeah, he did that. And then I helped in this. And even the other execs would correct me and said, of course, we understand your manager would guide you, but it's your work and own it. So that all changed quite a lot. And then even practically, like this was the time, like when he just came in, I realized that I was being underpaid by a long way. So I'd come in as a migrant, right? I didn't quite know what Australians get paid. I was getting paid a lot as an investment banker and then also as a consultant. I didn't know what industry people would get paid. So I'd taken a pay cut without realizing how much I had taken. And in another 2.5, 3 years, I realized I was probably like $80,000, $90,000 underpaid. And that was my fault. But I went to him and said that, and he actually lobbied the executives for my pay rise, and I got most of that. I think within 6 months, in the actual appraisal cycle, I got maybe $35,000 more, which is a massive, massive pay rise for me at that stage. But he also lobbied and got me a, if this strategy works in another 6 months, we have the option of giving you a mid-year rise. And then, yes, I had to bring it up again in 6 months, mid-year out of cycle pay rise, but I got that too. So I learned a lot about this internal kind of lobbying for your team members, how you stand up for them. A lot of like what happens when there was a little mistake somewhere that had gone through my team, me, him, even the CEO to a board member. And he would be like, okay, just walk into the CEO and explain what went wrong. And these all taught me so much of leadership, just watching him. He's by far my absolutely the best manager ever.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think you hit on a lot of interesting facts and pointers there of what makes a great manager. Shine the light on the people that you are guiding and give the credit where it's due and ensure that the person that's executing gets all the due credit that they're supposed to get and also like grow their careers, right? That's what probably has happened to you. and a lot of great things, right? That you talked about the pay parity, like being a migrant. And I'm sure he'd moved mountains to get you to that pay parity. And kudos to him. And yeah, lots of interesting facts and interesting tidbits you had sprayed throughout your answer about what makes for a great manager. So let's now pivot to your next journey. You moved to Coles and taking on like a 600 million P&L at that time when the performance was declining. And what were the first moves that you made to make it grow again? Like, what was your strategy there? You're finding yourself in a declining business. What are the things that you have to look out for? And what did you end up doing to turn that business around?
Yeah. So Coles Liquor, so I joined the liquor division of a grocery supermarket to start with. So they headhunted me. They headhunted me initially to start their what's called the merchandise strategy, which is like commercial strategy for retail. But about a year in, there was a peer of mine who was running this $600 million P&L for exclusive brands to Coles. This manager actually told me, can you take on this additional duty while we have a vacancy there to turn this team and performance around? It was in quite a bad state in commercial as well as team performance. So there was this team engagement as well. That was very low. It's about the lowest that I've ever seen in my entire career. So it was quite a challenging problem, but the fact that my manager had this belief in me was a big start to begin with. It's such a big thing to see your manager have this belief in you. So that gives a start. But when I walked into this team, I remember my first meeting, and I think it happened to be around mid-year, which in Australia is the start of the financial year as well. So we need to think of what our goals are for the financial year. Clearly, I'm new to this team, so why don't you guys help me and let's see what should we do. When I said that, a lot of team members came up with, well, they should give the money to do this and they should put our products in front and center and they should do this. I'm like, hey, let's stop. The question is, what is our goal, not what others need to do for that goal. That does come, like it is important to know who needs to enable you, etc., etc. But the whole team to be focused and fixated on what can others do for you, that doesn't work. Like that is not how a team is engaged. But the biggest changes are made the first thing, and based on that first meeting, was to actually set the vision and KPIs for that team that is related to the organizational strategy. The idea is go back to the organization because you're only a team within the organization. What's the org strategy? What do you want? What does the organization need you to deliver in order to deliver the organization strategy? And setting the vision and KPI back to that. That did mean that we had to lose some people. So once you set the new KPI, of course, people have to decide whether that still suits them. So there were some people changes. I had to do some very deep team sessions as well to bring together, I had to put new roles in. So I put a commercial manager role in, a commercial finance business partner role in, etc. With these new people and old people gone, I had to do like very emotion focused team sessions. Like, let's get to know each other from our childhood. Bring your photo albums in. Let's get to know each other as people instead of fighting. You don't know enough wine, you don't know enough spirits or beer or whatever. So a lot of that as well. And then again, back to what I've been saying, a lot of process to create the new products, commercial processes, reports, dashboards, a lot of data. And then from there, celebrating wins. Like I did this mini trade show inside the company itself, like took over a big hall, did a mini trade show and called the group CEO and group executives in there. So this tiny team kind of feels like, 12 of us or 13 of us do this big thing that the CEO comes in and tastes our products and says things, etc. So celebrating a lot of wins as well, and eventually to actually find a successor. So the eventual successor of that team, we had a 1 hour discussion because this team hadn't been performing well for a long time. So through the year that I turned around, there were still kind of rumors. So I talked to her and got the successor so that this change keeps going. It doesn't just stop because I stopped as well. But a huge learning in people-centric change and focus on the customer. And sometimes your customer will be product focused. Sometimes your customer will be outcome focused. And that's a big difference. You need to know what customer you're serving. The Walmart customer and a Rolls Royce customer are different. You can't serve them the same way.
And I see a lot of, like, you setting a vision and aligning your KPIs to realizing that particular vision. And you did talk about a lot about the data, the dashboards that you had created to guide the team as to how they're doing from a health standpoint. And it's a very powerful lesson that you threw in with the internal trade show, right? And not often get that kind of a visibility to the teams that you're working with, where a group CEO shows up and is, it's such a morale booster as well for the individuals in that organization. And I also felt like, you have this habit of making things better and ensuring that that stays that way. And you were,
That is what drives me. Like literally, if you ask me like what makes me get up and go to work, whether it's in my own business or employer, whatever, what drives me is how do I make this place, this person's life, this team member's career better? And how does it stay that way, even though I leave? Because I thrive on variety as well. So once it's the problem is solved, I'm like, what's the next problem to solve? But I want that to stay, not just go to pieces because I've left.
Yeah, that's your legacy, right? That's an amazing mindset to have, and carrying forward that momentum that you had created is crucial. So as I want to close out this episode by doing some kind of reflections, what are some of the powerful elements that I can take from your career, right? If you were to summarize this career, long career of yours, how would you summarize that to our audience, Baishakhi?
Three things, and it'll make a difference to any career, whatever you're trying to go and do, which is belief, stamina or energy, and curiosity. The first thing is that you have to believe that a better outcome is possible. If you come into any job and you already think and you're limited in your beliefs and think this is why it won't work, this is what I've seen before, like whatever it is. If I did not believe that it is possible to come out of my small town, in fact, every single one of my friends are still there. I had to first get it in my mind that it is possible before I could then make it happen to go, what schools do I go to? What engineering college do I go to? How do I get there? How do I get this job? I had no clue. When I thought I would go in a plane and go somewhere, I had no idea. No one in my whole family or neighborhood had ever done that. And it's the same at any job. If I come in and think this team had been underperforming for so many years, so this brand has been declining for 12 years, and this is what it is, that is what customers are doing, then you will never even fight for the rest. So number one is belief. Number two is the stamina or energy that you bring into it. Because unless you have this, like, it is difficult to change. It is difficult to change a person. It is more difficult to change a collective of people. And then if you're trying to drive that change through an ecosystem of suppliers, customers, and many different vendors and technologies and whatever else, it's extremely difficult. You will need the energy to learn. You will need the energy to keep fighting even when there are setbacks and failures. You will need the energy to drive. Like other people will face those setbacks and lose momentum, and you as the leader have to get in there. However much you're feeling inside, you have to get in there, jump up and down, and have the energy to encourage people, right? So that stamina or energy is the number two thing. And the number three thing always is curiosity and keeping on learning. There's never an end. And now there's like new things all the time, right? So keep up with the younger team members, keep up with new technologies, but also keep up with new industries, because who's your competitor changes every day. Like a phone comes in and the camera companies go away because the camera is in your phone. The alarm clocks go away because the alarm's in my phone. So who knows? Netflix says sleep is their competitor. So you have to constantly be curious and keep your mind open to go, what else can I do? Why is this happening? Why would that person face this problem if that person says it's okay? If I solve here, why does it go there? Like you have to know, have that learning mindset to keep going. So I think that the three pillars of that belief, the energy, and the curiosity is what keeps my career, but I've noticed so many other careers going.
Yeah, I can only, say that those transitions, probably these three factors played a huge role in those transitions of yours, right? going from IT consulting to going to investment banking, then pivoting to FMCG, then going back liquor. Your story itself is very, very novel and fascinating. And for you to have summarized that into belief, stamina, and curiosity and learning is amazing. Thank you so much for this first episode, Baishakhi. I learned a lot and had an incredible time talking to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.